never thought I'd live to see the day the admins released a dungeon update that is actually good, but they finally did it. Almost. The new rooms kind of suck, but other than that, this was an awesome update for early game. It was an awesome update for late game. It was just an awesome update all around. So I want to take you guys through all the important stuff and all the new meta changes, especially at the top level. I spent my past few days doing all the calculations and all the research for all the new items and spending basically all my time on alpha to look at literally everything. So I know what all the important things are, and I'm going to share it with all you guys. Of course, this video wouldn't have been possible without some help, so shout out to everyone on the screen right now for helping me test strats and look for bugs. Also, make sure to subscribe. Sorry for like not existing for the past half a year, but I'm back now. So yeah, I don't know. Let's just get into the video. I'm bad at intros. So basically, in this first section, I'm going to run through all the important changes they made real quick. Then in the second section, I'll talk about class balancing changes. In the third section, I'll talk about all the new items and whether they'll be good or not. And in the final section, I'll talk bugs and meta shifts, especially M7. Now let's get into it. Starting off, swing range is now a stat. It's exactly what it says it is. It's just your melee range. Short bows now fire at their maximum fire rate if you hold down right click. This is an awesome change because it makes auto clickers useless for dungeons since people used to auto click short bows to get the max fire rate. Also for turn, this means turn beam will now proc on left click. The patch notes say turn beam has a 0.25 second cooldown as well. A bunch of dungeon items received minor balancing updates, but the important ones are giant sword turning into a long sword with +1 swing range, and also wither goggles now only requiring an F6 completion to use as opposed to Kata 28 previously. Mender Crown got the same treatment as wither goggles, but Mender Crown is even more useless now than before since vitality and mending have been nerfed to no longer scale with Kata. They will still scale with stars, meaning you can get only up to 150 vitality from Crown or 175 with Master Stars. This is comparable to Reaper Mask, which doubles your vitality and mending, bringing them to basically the exact same value in practice. Reaper Mask also gives more EHP than Crown, making it just a better item in every respect. The only advantage Crown has now is cost, so it's still going to be viable for lower level, but there's just no reason to use Crown anymore above like Kata 30. Moving on, Dungeon Talisman now give double MP in dungeons, but they don't double other stats. For example, your enrichments will not be doubled. Master Mode completions now count for double in boss collections, so make sure to check those. I got a free Diamond Professor head, so like that's the best change yet. You no longer need a dungeon orb in your inventory to use class abilities, but you can still use it if you want to. I don't know why you would want to though. Like for those unaware, hitting your drop key uses your ult, and your shift drop key uses your regular ability. That's like so much easier than clicking an orb in your hotbar, so I don't know why you wouldn't do that. You also now get a short period of invincibility when leaping to someone, so you don't die if they're like nuking themselves for some reason. Entrance F1 and F2 mobs now have less health apparently for some reason. There's a much larger salvage menu now, along with buttons to quickly add rare and epic items that you haven't upgraded. I would personally just click the items in manually, but maybe I'm just paranoid, I don't know. Sedan spawns a lot faster now in about 11 seconds compared to the 32 seconds before. In F7 and M7, the door from P1 to P2 opens once Maxor dies, which speeds up phase 1 by about 10 seconds. When Storm flies in a circle around the arena, he will now speed up by 0.1 seconds per wither miner you kill. However, this currently appears to be soft locked at a 6-second decrease in time, meaning you can only make him activate lightning in about 24 seconds now compared to 30 before. Dragons in M7P5 have been buffed from 900 mil health to 1 bill health, but their defense was nerfed from 3700 to 2500. This is an overall nerf of EHP from 34.2 bill originally to 26 bill now, which is a pretty substantial nerf. This, along with all the class changes, will make drag skipping much easier. More on that later. Soul Eater is no longer procs by non-critical hits such as Thorns or Reflection. However, Soul Eater appears to currently be bugged and is giving about 20 times too little damage from Soul Eater. This will be covered more later. King Midas now needs to be killed for that rune to be checked, which is awesome. You no longer lose potions and class bonuses when disconnecting from a run. Keys should no longer spawn in half blocks and will also not spawn with respawning skeletons. You know, like when you kill the last mob, but then the key spawns in some completely random spot because there was a respawning skeleton? Yeah, they finally fixed that. E-Drag will now give the intended 200% additive damage to end mobs compared to the 300% it gave before. It's still better for P5. Gonna be honest, I got no idea how this affects E-Man Slayer. I personally haven't left dungeons in like a year, so like, don't ask me, bro. Soul Whip no longer skips Thorn. In fact, you can't stun Thorn at all. Isn't that awesome? Blood Portal now sends you to boss the tick you walk into it, so no more waiting in Portal for 4 seconds. Kata 50 got a 10% buff from 465 to 475% stats on dungeon items. Don't know why, but it did. Ice Fill now updates when you walk in the block as compared to being on a 7 TPS timer before. Basically, you can just run on it and it won't break. It's so amazing, bro. M7 withers appear to have more defense, although this was not mentioned in the patch notes. I can't believe I actually have to confirm this, but no, ferocity does not work on M7 dragons. I don't know why you think this. You can hear it now, yes, but you can still hear ferocity when you hit anything else, and you have been able to for the past like year and a half. So I don't know what you guys are on. Finally, and the biggest change so far, decoys no longer proc bouncies. So good night S-Warp, good night a lot of decoy tech, but we will get to that later. And that's about it for important changes. So that was a lot of stuff, and most of the changes were pretty good, but there's a lot more stuff to discuss still. Let's talk about the class balancing changes. Now, I know you all want to hear about burst the most, so I'll start off with that. As you probably know, the class got a complete overhaul, complete with 2 new passives that completely changed the class playstyle. My numbers are all for burst 50, but I'll put the formulas on screen so you can calculate for any burst level. Or you can just enter your menu and look at your own burst level, I don't know. Bloodlust changed slightly to now give 3% health on each melee hit, compared to giving a lot of health on your first hit after killing a mob. Lust for Blood, Burst's main source of DPS, also changed. The ability now caps at 950% additive damage if you dupe burst, nerfed from 1050%. The scaling remains the same at 45% increase per hit. With no dupe, the cap is now 1200%, buffed from the previous 1100%. Scaling is also buffed, giving 60% additive damage per hit. The new passive, Indomitable, I think that's how it's pronounced, gives 10% of your strength as defense or 15% if no dupe. This is huge. It basically makes you invincible, and I argue it's actually too much and should be scaled less aggressively, but oh well. The other new class passive, Weapon Master, gives 5 attack range or 5.5 if no dupe. It also expands your melee attack into a frontal cone, with the length of this cone being the length of your melee attack range and the theta being 30 degrees, or a radius of range times the square root of 3 over 3. Ferocity does not work in this cone. I'm told that ferocity should work in true melee range apparently, aka like 3 blocks in front of you, but it's bugged to not work. If this is intentional and does not get fixed, melee burst will not be better than turn burst for boss. But if it does get fixed, burst will be really good, but also really expensive. More on that and how these changes are going to affect burst clear will come later when I talk about how metas are shifting. Finally, Throwing Axe procs when you hit shift, which is more annoying than it is helpful, to be honest. It's so annoying hearing that ability on cooldown sound when I'm just trying to do a route. And Ragnarok, the Burr's ult, is buffed to give 50% multiplicative damage, 100 attack speed, and a bunch of walk speed. It still summons the children to stab your opponent, to be clear. Anyways, that's all for Burrs. Archer did get changed slightly too. Dupe Arch is now less punishing. I calculated that an individual archer with a term and Arch 50 would lose 36% of their DPS if they duped Arch, and an Arch 30 with a Juju would lose about 60%, largely due to decreased chances for double and triple arrows. Healer also got a new ability called Overheal. It's getting kind of crowded in this menu. Basically, healing players who have full health gives them 40% of their health as absorption instead, or 60% with no dupe. Wish also now fully heals players and gives them absorption amounts equivalent to what they would have gotten from Overheal. Finally, a buff bigger than the Burrs buff, believe it or not, Mage Beam is now affected by attack speed. Mage does more damage than Archer now, if you have the right setup. Mage Beam also has a larger radius now, making it much easier to hit mobs, and the damage drop-off from range starts at 10 blocks now, not 5. Beam range is also doubled in M7 Phase 5. These buffs are absolutely huge, and they tear the meta apart. So I'm going to go over some new strats for M7 specifically, give some updated gear progression for late game, but before we get to that, I'm going to give some commentary on the new items they dropped. First, let's talk about the new frag. Spirit Bear can now spawn as a mini-boss in blood rooms in F5 or above, and it drops the Thorn Fragment, which can be used to frag various items. Fragging a Spirit Scepter gives it 10 more damage, 30 more intel, and 250 more base ability damage. It doesn't change the magic scaling though, as far as I can tell. Spirit Boots can be fragged, increasing their rarity, giving them 10 more strength and 10 more speed. Spirit Shortbow can be fragged and gains 10 damage and 10 strength. Bone Meringue gains 50 damage and 20 strength, yet somehow still sucks. Finally, Spirit Mask increases its rarity and gains 25 defense, 10 speed, 5 intel, and its ability will heal for 100 health plus 3% of your max health, as well as what it did before. Overall, this was really just a buff to Spirit Shortbow and Spirit Scepter. It doesn't really provide a meaningful buff to Bone Meringue, Spirit Boots, or Spirit Mask. However, there is a new longsword you can craft from F4 drops called the Bone Reaver. It's crafted with a Spirit Sword, 5 Spirit Bones, and 20 enchanted bone blocks. It's an epic longsword with 235 damage, 90 strength, and plus 0.5 swing range. These are some pretty impressive stats for such a low level sword, and I expect it to be very useful for clearing his burrs, definitely better than Spirit Shortbow. It also has an ability that slashes in a huge arc, dealing 125% melee damage to all enemies in it. As far as I can tell, this arc appears to be almost 180 degrees, so it really is huge, but it only extends out as far as your melee range goes. It has 4 charges that regen over 5 seconds. It has a floor 4 completion requirement and costs 670 Wither Essence to 5-star. There's 2 more new items called the Fell Rose and the Fell Skull. Fell Rose is crafted from 3 ancient roses and 1 stack of Fell Pearls and is used in 2 crafts. Fell Skull is an RNG drop from F6 and M6, which is only used to craft 1 item. Bone Reaver can be crafted with a Fell Skull and 5 Fell Roses into the Felthorn Reaper, which can be fragged with Bigfoot lassos for some reason to apparently just be a competitor with Shadow Fury for the title of Budget Giant Sword. Fragged Felthorn Reaper has 285 damage, 10 strength, 125 crit damage, and has the same item abilities as Bone Reaver, except the ability now slashes for 135% damage. It has somewhat worse stats than Shadow Fury, but it's in exchange for +1 swing range or 1.5 if fragged. It also appears to be decently cheaper, at least once Fell Skulls go down in price. Since both Shadow Fury and Felthorn are mainly going to be used for burrs, the swing range justifies the stat discrepancy between these 2 swords and potentially makes Felthorn better. Felthorn Reaper has a floor 6 requirement though, making it tougher to obtain. It requires 670 Wither Essence to 5-star. Personally, I think Felthorn Reaper is the new best weapon for burrs before Giant Sword, but Shadow Fury is still a valid competitor and definitely isn't to be looked down at. Finally, Bouquet of Lies is an upgrade to the Flower of Truth, crafted with the Flower of Truth and 12 Fell Roses. It has 220 damage, 300 strength, 50 crit damage, and has a similar ability to the Flower of Truth, except it shoots 3 roses instead of 1. In theory, it should be slightly more damage than Shadow Fury or Felthorn, and its cheapness makes it worth going for, especially as a budget option. It's possible it'll do more damage to minis, making it worth it to dual wield, but whether this is actually going to be important for clear at low level will depend on each player and their stat distributions. Now for the interesting items, which I did a lot of calculations for. There's 5 new dungeon equipment. The Balloon Snake, which drops from F1 and M1 and grants jump boost 2. The Bone Necklace, crafted with 96 soul string, a spirit wing, and 2 spirit bones, which heavily increases tank radius and grants some nice defense. The Shadow Assassin Cloak, which drops from F5 and M5 and grants 10% additive damage on the next melee hit after teleporting, and can be fragged. The Adaptive Belt, which drops from F2 and M2 and grants stats based on the class you have selected and can be fragged. And finally, the Soul Weaver Gloves, which drop from F6 and M6 and summons a haunted skull that can make enemies deal slightly less damage. Balloon Snake looks kinda silly, but it's a promising item for Mage. However, it doesn't appear to be better for DPS at the moment. It looks good earlier game, but it's outdone by dominance in the later game. As for the other items, they all look really good, mostly because of the base stats they give. Sure, Bone Necklace has a great ability and will be really good for tank, but it's the base stats of these items that set them apart. Because they're dungeon items, their stats will scale with kata and stars and should be able to be master starred. Now, right now they can't be master starred, but I'm told this is a bug and will eventually be fixed. They will all obviously be better than any other equipment simply because they're dungeon items, with the possible exception of dominance 10 pieces, especially since speed attributes extremely important, so using too many of these pieces might not be possible due to their lack of attributes. I went through and set up a player with the max magic power after the update, all max items, Skyblock level 400 and 3-man Legion, which seemed very reasonable. I then calculated damage with 3/4 Molten and Gauntlet of Contagion using Dom 40, then substituted in each dungeon equipment one at a time for 4 different builds that will be talked about later. I also used Waxed as 3/4, however for melee weapons you should be using Strengthened. I'll talk more about melee weapons very soon, don't worry. You may have seen this table get passed around. These calculations are with power 19, stone 5, and no time blessings against an arbitrary wither that has 0 defense. As you can see, Shadow Assassin Cloak is an extremely good item, partially because it can be recomped to Mythic, but mostly because it gives a ton of strength, all of which scales in dungeons. Bone Necklace is also very good, but it's only good because of the 1 ultimate enchant, which scales with maxed collections. Replacing Gauntlet of Contagion with Soul Weaver Gloves for boss also appears to give good damage, but again, speed attribute is very important for M7, so is any of this even worth it? Well, Shadow Assassin Cloak is obviously worth it, given how good it is. However, Soul Weaver Gloves are also worth it. First of all, I should point out that Dom doesn't scale with blessings, but stats like Strength do, meaning the higher the blessing, the better the dungeon equipment will be compared to Dom. P19 is very mid for the end of an M7 run, so it's fair to say that you'll get the numbers described here or possibly higher for your runs. Now, the more pieces you swap, the more important dominance will be, since your additive multiplier will be decreasing. Also, for every attribute you swap other than Shadow Assassin Cloak, you'll have to compensate in some manner with speed tunings. Speed 10 is the same as 33.3 speed tunings, so you shouldn't be assigning more than 33 speed tunings per equipment piece when you're compensating for them. However, if you can get away with less than this, you definitely should, since assigning 33 speed tunings costs you a whole half a crit chance. Now, obviously, Gauntlet of Contagion will be way better than Soul Weaver and Clear, but for boss, specifically after P2, Soul Weaver will be really good for DPS as an overall 1 to 2% DPS increase for most blessings. After swapping half your set out for dungeon equip, you start to see diminishing returns, and so you should only be swapping more than 2 pieces if you have really low level dominance. For tank, I would also recommend using Bone Necklace, but obviously not swapping Soul Weaver for boss since you don't do DPS in boss. For mage, you shouldn't be swapping anything right now. Currently, the mage meta is the same thing it used to be. As for lower level dungeons, the new equipment will probably not be absurdly expensive, but it's extremely good for damage, and I would highly recommend getting it and reforging it to wax if you're having issues with crit chance, or strengthened if you're not. I would like to point out for anyone watching in the future, the attribute rework that is maybe one day coming out is supposed to give all items attributes. If and when this update comes out and gives these items their own attributes, Dom Speed full dungeon equipment will be by far the best for dungeons, and swapping from Gauntlet of Contagion to Soul Weaver gloves for boss will be really useful. For mage, you would use Dom MP instead of Dom Speed, Implosion Belt and Gauntlet of Contagion for clear, but you'd swap to Adaptive Belt and Soul Weaver gloves for boss. You would also use Balloon Snake. However, for now, you really shouldn't be doing anything new as mage. Now, some of the stuff I said could change down the line even without attribute changes, so let's go over that and all the other changing metas. First of all, what am I supposed to run as Burrs? Hello? Well, I have good news. You now need an FT Valk, a Kim Valk, and a Kim Claymore to play Burrs in M7. Let's go through the specifics. First of all, we need to acknowledge 3 bugs. Burrs Ferocity just doesn't work. Now, obviously it's not supposed to work in the cone, but something tells me it should probably work within true melee range, and other people think the same thing. If we turn out to be wrong, you guys are lucky, and Burrs only needs FT Valk and Duplex Turn for boss. If it is bugged, you'll need a Kim Valk. Also, Burrs melee just does less damage against withers if someone else is shooting it with a term. For some reason, I don't know, and I can't explain why or how or what. That's all I know. So basically, same story as the other bug. If it's not fixed, you won't need a Kim Valk. Finally, Burrs melee is ghost damage on dragons. We're pretty sure this is a bug as well. If this turns out to be a bug, you're gonna need a Kim Claymore for boss, but you're already gonna need one for clear, so this shouldn't be that bad. All these bugs mean Burrs meta currently is the same exact thing it used to be. Yellow pad and optimizing for Terminator and all that good stuff. The literal only change you would use is Waxed Shadow Assassin Cloak. However, just for the sake of future-proofing my video, let's assume all the bugs are actually bugs and they all get fixed. First of all, melee Burrs is better than term Burrs and boss now, so you would need 4/4 strength and dungeon equipment. If you were super broke, you could run duplex term since term clear is fine and out DPS's Soul Eater Claymore everywhere else. Kim Claymore out DPS's term on drags, but not on withers. This means the next obvious upgrade is to get a Chimera Claymore. Even if they don't patch most of the bugs and only patch the one with dragons, you will need to get it. Claymore will be super good on dragons, and it's also the best for clear. After that, you just need to maximize your DPS on withers. I made a graph here. The bottom item is the one used to charge ferocity, and the top one is the one you're hitting with. This graph is against an arbitrary wither with 1000 defense, and the stats used to calculate with are relatively maxed. This means we aren't looking at the numbers themselves, just at how much higher each bar is than the other bars. As we can see here, term out DPS's Claymore in every aspect against withers, so you will never want to hit a wither with a Claymore. Fatal Tempo Valk makes DPS much better, so this is basically necessary, even if they never fix Burrs Pharaoh on melee or Burrs melee on withers, because even if you can't use ferocity on melee, you could still stack Fatal Tempo with melee and then use your duplex term with it, so this will be necessary. Assuming every bug is a bug and they all get fixed, Kim Valk will out DPS duplex term, meaning you'll have to get a Kim Valk as well. You can still use duplex to charge Lust for Blood since that's technically a damage increase, but that's less necessary on Storm and Goldor than it would be for like Necron, and you already have enough time to charge on Necron, so it's really not worth putting in the effort. Remember though, this is just talking about without the bugs that are not necessarily confirmed to even be bugs for some of them. If none of these change, meta will just be stack Pharaoh with FT Valk and use duplex term. For mage, meta is just stab withers with a Kim Hyperion and stab dragons with a Kim Claymore, since Hype out DPS's Claymore on withers but not on dragons because of the 1.5x damage to withers perk that wither blades give. You should be using the same equipment as before, 2-Force Molten, Implobell, and Gauntlet Contagion, Dom, Mana Pool. As for changes to Arch meta, Ren term sucks again, so you should be using Fatal Tempo and Duplex term term on Withers, and duplex term in P5. You should also run Shadow Assassin Cloak. You should still run an E-Dragon P5. Finally, Spiritual is better in precising them because you don't hit headshots in P5 consistently. There's a rumor that the 10% damage perk from Precise is broken. It's not, it's just additive damage, which ends up being about 1 or 2% of your total damage. In theory, this, along with the 1 crit chance you get, would be better than Spiritual, but hitting all headshots on dragons is not consistent, so Spiritual will in reality be more DPS. It's also pretty nice and clear. Tanks, you're now required to tank in Necron so you can help clear P2. Finally, before we get into how the M7 strats have evolved, I want to point out again that Soul Eater is for some reason doing very little damage right now, like 20 times less, meaning literally anything else is better for clear, except Fatal Tempo. Don't run Fatal Tempo on clear. The lag you cause does not justify the time save. It is literally worse than Soul Eater. Personally, I found Swarm Turn to be really nice, but I wouldn't recommend buying one as this seems to be a bug and will eventually get patched. And Duplex also works just fine. Anyways, let's go over how boss has changed. I'll give a quick summary of what boss currently looks like with all the bugs, then I'll give a summary of what it would look like if Burrs had both Ferocity on true melee and wasn't ghost damage to drags. Currently, P1 goes the same as before, but tank, aggro, Burrs and Mage, Crystal, Arch, DPS, and healer clip down to P3. Mage still clips down to P2, and everyone but the healer leaps. Speaking of healer, since decoys no longer work, you only need to pre-do 3rd dev and 2nd as well if you're fast. After you're done, leap back up and clear if there's something that needs to be cleared. While the healer is down, Arch, Burrs, Mage, and tank all need to clear P2. I personally was clearing mid as tank to cover everyone I could with radius, but it feels somewhat suboptimal since Burrs or Arch usually ends up clearing mid pretty early, so I expect tank will probably end up just clearing one of the sides.
Hello, this is the Holy Editor. I would like to point out that since P2 is soft locked at a 6-second speed up from Witherminer kills, tank at the moment does not necessarily have to clear. I'm only saying this to future-proof the video in case they change this. That's all. Back to the video.
Tank will still aggro Storm, healer still pads green, and Burrs still pads yellow since Mage DPS is way higher than Burrs. Mage now needs to mana drain again since you should be using half Pharaoh, half strong mana on your Necron again. P3 is just the same as it was before, but tanks might not have castle ready for tunnel since splits are a lot faster, so be prepared to Gloomlock or Mask. P4 you just go to the side with the most people on it, same thing that we did before Shadow Furying to decoys. Arch should still aggro Necron like we did before. P5 is a bit different though, but only in high DPS parties. Because DPS is so much better, true 5-5 skip is possible. Not only possible, it's consistent. This means on first spawn, you'll have to split up into 2 teams, the Burrs and the Mage going together, and the Archer going with the tank and the healer. A good Mage and Burrs will out DPS a good Archer, so Burrs and Mage will team up on the harder dragon, while Arch Soul is the easier one. This is also why Arch gets the debuff classes, while Mage and Burrs don't. A good way to visualize the drag priority is like this. Burrs goes forward on this list, and Arch goes backwards. This does mean Mage needs to pre-LB before they can LCM, but luckily by pre-firing LBs, you can still be LCMing the second the dragon spawns and hit all of your LBs. Healer should also pre-LB, and they should Jerry Sheen up to Ice Spray like the Mage used to. Tank should also LB, but generally in the top community we've been having the healer Ice Spray, not the tank. There's no logic to this, it's just what we've been doing. Both the healer and the tank should be stacking lethality with Soul Whip. Now if they fix the bugs that are probably bugs, a couple of things change. First of all, Arch is Crystal and Burrs is DPS now in P1. Second, Arch is yellow pad since Arch DPS sucks compared to Burrs and Mage. Third of all, Burrs has to melee dragons. True 5-5 will probably be consistent for everything, and gonna be honest, I have no idea who goes to what dragons, and I'll let the meta develop itself if the bugs that are probably bugs get fixed. Final thing, Burrs will aggro P4. Wow, that was a lot to talk about. Maybe I should make some more detailed videos about more M7 once the metas are more defined. The last changes I want to talk about are the new dungeon rooms, which are all mob rooms and apparently most of them suck. I've linked to secret route videos for all the new rooms in the description so you can go watch them. Also, most of the research for this video was done on alpha, but I spent a lot of time verifying info once the changes rolled. It is still possible I missed something and conveyed slightly false information, so if you think anything I said is incorrect, leave a comment and I'll either convince you that you're wrong or I'll put it in the video description. You should check the description in fact to see if there's anything I did get wrong. Anyways, to summarize the video, go buy more Hyperions and put Fatal Tempo on any weapon you can think of, and it probably has a use. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for dungeons or something. I don't know. I only do dungeons or random math and science about dungeons. So subscribe to see me do integrals to calculate drag DPS maybe? I don't know. I'm bad at outros. I'm just ending the video. See ya, bro.